A review copy of Super Dodgeball Beats was provided to me for free by publisher PlayStack London and developer Final Boss Games. Super Dodgeball Beats is less about dodgeball and more about tapping buttons in time with the music. It's your typical music and rhythm game, and I'm a big fan of the genre. In this case, Super Dodgeball Beats attempts to mix things up by framing each song as a versus match as opposed to simply playing through the song. It works for the most part, and it's not a bad game. However, there's not enough here for me to give this a solid recommendation. It just falls short, but there's potential here for this to have actually been a good game. The story tells of three nerds who were recruited and/or kidnapped into the world of dodgeball. They must advance through the leagues and collect the trophies along the way to become dodgeball legends. There's not much, if at all, to the story. Not that I was expecting anything too deep, but it would have been nice if each league at least had a unique ending, rather than simply being slight variations of each other, or if the comics were in color. However, the game does have a great art style and fun animations during the gameplay. It's nothing too special, but each character is goofy and quirky enough that it's enjoyable just to look at them. This goes along with the little bits of lore, as well as some of the artwork that shows them just hanging out casually. It's all totally unnecessary, but it is clear that a lot of work went into the game's presentation, and it does look quite nice. Too bad I can't say the same for the music. It's fine, and the soundtrack would be perfectly acceptable in the background for most any other game. But if music is the primary focus here, then it needs to be held to a higher standard. There are a total of 18 songs in the game. The 9 theme songs for each character have 3 difficulty levels, which simply affects the complexity of button prompts. The remaining 9 songs have only 1 difficulty each, with 3 of them being easy, 3 medium, and 3 hard. So a total of 18 songs, and half of them don't get a difficulty selection. I suppose you get what you pay for at only $13, but I can't get over the fact that I completed the whole campaign in about 5 hours, and the vast majority of that time was stuck on the last campaign on the hardest difficulty. There's just not a whole lot of content here. The gameplay has your dodgeball team in a diamond formation, and it's meant to represent the 4 face buttons on a typical controller. As a circle surrounds and overlaps a character, the corresponding button needs to be pressed or held down in time with the beat, or the joystick needs to be pressed against a particular direction. Keep this up as best you can to the end of the song, and that's the game. One of my bigger complaints that I was surprised to discover was the lack of creativity and complexity with the button prompts, specifically a lack of multitasking. In other words, the player is never asked to move the joystick while pressing other buttons, or to hold down one button while pressing another, or to hit multiple buttons at once. It's extremely basic. You just get that simple rapid-fire buttons and awkward beats at most. What is unique and interesting here are the implementations of the power-ups. If you've played Guitar Hero 3, then you'll have an idea of what this is about. As each player manages to perform well, a meter will fill upon which a random power-up is granted. Most of these attempt to sabotage the opposing player, such as by obscuring the screen or challenging them to keep up a combo, or else a bomb will explode and severely damage their score. Being petrified makes it so that only perfect hits will count, while being poisoned disables half of your buttons. One power-up will steal meter from your opponent, another will disable any negative effects on yourself, and yet another will steal your opponent's currently held power-up. There's a surprising amount of variety here with very little overlap. Most of these power-ups are best used right away without really thinking about it. But 3 of them in particular, the Candy, Raccoon, and Mime, need to be used in reaction to an opponent. Basically, the power-up mechanic is meant to be a distraction, not only to deal with your opponent's use, but also to check which one you've received yourself and to decide if it's best saved or used immediately. It can already be bad enough trying to determine which buttons to press in what order at a mere glance, but having to dart your eyes across the screen to see what power-up you've gotten or what your opponent might have gotten makes this game so much more difficult. While this power-up system is technically optional, it is a powerful addition to the game, and the player would be handicapping themselves by ignoring it. Of course, using things like screen-obscuring power-ups against computer opponents sounds pretty dumb and pointless, but it seems as though the game is designed to be far more lenient against the player if they're using power-ups well. And I do commend the developers for taking the extra step to make sure that they did so. But regardless, power-ups alone will only get you so far, and simply hitting buttons without missing is all that you'll really need in the end. A couple of other little flaws that really bothered me is that the gameplay beats never really lined up with the music all that well. If you're familiar with Elite Beat Agents and the song Canned Heat, then I'm sure you'll know what I'm getting at. But in this case, it's like that for every song. It's hard to pin down, but it just doesn't feel right. Also, the movement prompts, and especially the hold down prompts, have absolutely no standard to them whatsoever. The last few songs on the highest difficulty are especially bad about it. There's no way to tell how long you're supposed to hold the button down for, and the prompt can go very quickly. It already doesn't help that half the circle is blocked by the player, so these sudden timings just make it even worse. These are the kind of things that make it come off as a budget title, and I suppose that's exactly what it is, but I'm not gonna forgive the game for these awkward missteps either. There is multiplayer, no doubt the main focus of the game, which I would imagine plays similarly to the single player campaign. But it's offline only, so it's nothing I can really test. I think this game can work really well as a multiplayer game, as both players will need to divert their focus between the rhythm game and the power-up game to be effective, which is a lot harder said than done. However, when you get down to it, the game as a whole is just too shallow, and the music suffers from both being a limited track list as well as just being nothing special on its own. This could be worth picking up if you and a local buddy are really into music and rhythm games, and I say that because I can't really think of another music game that has handled power-ups this well. Even then though, there are so many other music games that are way more worth your time. Games like Thumper or Rez have an even more limiting soundtrack, but they are far more effective at blending the gameplay with the music. Amplitude is also a fantastic example of blending interactivity with audio, and Tetris Effect turned out to be an incredible music game in its own right. And of course, there are the obvious picks like Rock Band and DJ Hero, among others. Granted, most of these games are single-player focused, but even then they still have far more value individually than this game does. It's probably unfair to compare this small indie game against the big boys, but I want to point out that you're still better off replaying an old favorite before bothering to pick this one up. However, again, if you have a local buddy and the two of you are really into this kind of stuff, then you might find enough enjoyment here to get a kick out of this game for 2 or 3 days until you get bored of it. It's not a bad game at all, but against the competition, there's just not much here to stand out. Thanks for watching my review on Super Dodgeball Beats.